This year at the 2024 VERGE conference in San Jose, California, the Global Heat Reduction team hosted a panel to discuss how tackling super pollutants can drastically reduce excess heat in the near term. Here are some of the key insights we picked up from the discussion.
We all know that the main villain in the climate story is carbon dioxide, but that's only responsible for about half of the warming to date. The rest of it comes, well, mostly from the so-called short-lived climate pollutants, which are highlighted in bold. They're methane, carbon monoxide and VOCs, F-gases, and black carbon. And just a few words about each of these. So methane is the second most important greenhouse gas after CO2. It's responsible for about a quarter of observed warming, a little more. It has a short lifetime in the atmosphere. And one thing that's really different about methane from CO2, CO2 is pretty inert within the atmosphere. It's removed by ocean sink and terrestrial sink, but within the atmosphere itself, it's pretty inert. Methane is not like that. It's broken down by chemical reactions in the atmosphere. The lifetime averages about 11 years. It varies depending on where in the atmosphere the methane is. Mitigating these short-lived pollutants does not need to trade off against mitigating carbon dioxide emissions, and in fact shouldn't trade off. And we can do both, and we should do both, and we must do both.
I'm going to talk about something similar, but I'm going to focus more on black carbon. Just to say how it works. So black carbon, well, it comes from combustion, primarily combustion from diesel exhaust, jet fuel, kerosene burning, biomass burning, biofuel burning, coal burning, any type of wood burning. Soot particles, they appear black because they absorb all wavelengths of sunlight. They're so powerful at absorbing sunlight and converting it to heat that per unit mass, they're 1 million times more powerful than carbon dioxide at warming the air. So soot causes warming from 4 effects. One is, as I just mentioned, it absorbs sunlight, then heats up, radiates the heat to the air around it. That makes it really powerful. But it becomes even more powerful, warmer when it gets coated. So once it's emitted in somewhat pure form. And you get other particles or gases going into it or particles attaching to it. So you get these bigger particles with soot in the middle. That soot particle will absorb more sunlight when it's coated. And that is really what makes black carbon, it turns out. When you look at it in terms of radiative forcing, it's the second leading cause of global warming after carbon dioxide. When you really look at the details of calculating that internal mixing, which occurs over time in the atmosphere. But then there are a couple other impacts it has. Well, when it goes onto snow, it eventually deposits. When it deposits on snow or sea ice, it darkens the snow or sea ice, and it melts it faster. So that causes a positive feedback, because when you melt, like if you're over the Arctic and you have like a meter thick sea ice with a little bit of snow on it, you melt some of the snow, which has a 90 to 95% reflectivity, then you uncover the sea ice below, which has a 60 to 65% reflectivity. If you melt that, then you go down to the ocean, which has a 7% reflectivity. So this is one of the reasons why soot is one of the causes of Arctic sea ice loss, and why that's a positive feedback to increasing warming faster. The fourth impact is on clouds. In a cloud, sunlight gets scattered around. And so you have these soot particles inside the cloud. Eventually that light hits a soot particle, it warms up, it can evaporate the cloud from the inside. So they cause clouds to disappear, and that's a positive feedback because clouds are reflective for the most part. And when you get rid of the cloud by evaporating it, sunlight gets to the surface heats faster, you get a positive feedback.
So I'm not a climate scientist, but I actually want to go, thank you guys so much. I want to go back to something that Phil said, which is that we can and must do both. We can and must stop the combustion and ultimately find ways to remove and sink the carbon that's in the atmosphere. But we also have to find ways to address this short-term crisis that's facing us now. So I want to ask a question. How many people in here know what GWP 100 is? I know you do. Okay, so you know that the market-based model upon which decarbonization is resting in carbon markets and in carbon accounting is based over a 100-year model, and it includes a basket of greenhouse gases, but it doesn't include black carbon and some of these other low-level ozone and some of these other really high-potent near-term driving heat factors. And the problem is that's the system that everybody's bought into. You can't distinguish, if you're buying a carbon credit, what of my emissions are causing this near-term driving, that if we don't stop, then we threaten not getting past the next critical couple decades, as Phil said, where the worst outcomes of climate change could be triggered. So you have to address both. And the way that you need business to do it, and what businesses are doing is they're doing carbon markets and carbon footprints. So the Global Heat Reduction Initiative is trying to bring in all climate drivers. It's based on a protocol that was developed by our founder, Dr. Stan Rhodes, and a group of scientists, and me and the team, some folks here, have been working to commercialize this protocol, this radiative forcing science, which is excess trapped heat, effectively, into the system that's being used by businesses and governments around the world, which is carbon markets. We want companies to be able to come and know that when they purchase a credit here, they're getting their CO2e removal or reduction, but they're also getting the CO2e plus. They're getting this additional impact over these crucial next couple decades.
At Recoolit, we're really, we started this company to address refrigerant emissions. Refrigerants really are the heat transfer chemicals that are used inside of all cooling systems, right? And so they're really everywhere all around us. It's inside of your homes, your cars, your office spaces, inside your supermarkets, your hospitals. It's really used for all, temperature control. It's also growing rapidly. Right, so you can look at the graph over there on the right, and for that graph is showing how the number of ACs that are going to be installed in the coming decades is going to be tripling by 2050. But really, when you focus around on the emerging markets, it's going to be 5xing and 6xing, especially when you talk about areas like Southeast Asia and in India. And so, why is that an issue? Well, like Phil mentioned earlier, these refrigerants really are high GWP gases. Right, we're talking about 1,000, 2,000 times more potent than CO2 on a pound-for-pound basis. And so that really then results in really these extremely high climate impact. We're talking about approximately 6% of global emissions annually, and that number is rapidly rising. And so when you think about this refrigerant bank that exists, part of that, the emissions may be occurring from leakage that occurs when you've got your systems and operations. The other piece might be through service events that take place or end-of-life disposals where refrigerants are then really released out to the atmosphere. And so it's not so much that these technicians out there are, they're releasing it, but not they're evil people. It's just that there really isn't an alternate, practical option for them, right? They're going to need money to dispose that, to pay someone to destroy that gas. They need training to do the proper recovery. They may not have the equipment to do that. And so Recoolit comes in to basically solve all of those barriers for them and make it so that it is feasible for them to be able to properly recover that refrigerant gas. When that recovery actually takes place, here's some images of what is actually happening on the ground. And so this is with a lot of our projects and some of our team members out there doing this work out in Indonesia. And so you can see this is sort of a common image where you've got a bunch of techs out on the rooftop, out in the scorching heat. They're recovering from these refrigerant gases. The middle dungeon looking picture, that is in an underground basement, actually, and under a mall where they're recovering from this large chiller project where they're going to be disposing of that chiller, right? And so that's actually just a lot of CO2 equivalent worth of emissions, where if we didn't come in to intervene and give them the equipment, the training, the financial incentive to go and recover from the gas, it would have emitted out to the atmosphere. So we provide that financial incentive, the training, and once they do that recovery, we then basically buy back that gas off of them. That's where we create that financial incentive. We handle then everything else downstream. So that is where we do the transportation, the consolidation of the gases, the chemical testing of the gas, eventually destroying that gas. The gas is gone for good. And then all of that is then tracked on our software platform, which is where we're able to then generate that carbon credit. And now thankfully we've got a partner in GHR now where they're sort of the registry that we're working closely together with to be generating those credits.